As the whole world is still fighting the COVID-19 pandemic and economic recession, China proposes solutions to these global problems, multilateralism in its true sense. In an online speech at the World Economic Forum's Davos agenda, Chinese President Xi Jinping highlighted the importance of multilateralism and warned against a mentality of small circles, Cold War or decoupling. Meanwhile, as the Biden administration has announced to return to multilateralism, there are concerns about selective or pseudo-multilateralism on the Chinese side. How to understand these concepts? As the U.S. now is trying to coalesce its traditional allies on its China policy, what's the sentiment among Asian countries? I'm pleased to be joined via Skype from Singapore by Kishore Mahbubani, Distinguished Fellow at the Asia Research Institute at the National University of Singapore. Dear Dr. Mahbubani, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start with the title of President Xi's speech, which is "Let the Torch of Multilateralism light up humanity's way forward." It's a very interesting title, and there is much emphasis on the importance of multilateralism in the speech. For instance, he warned against the mentality of new Cold War and decoupling. Let's take a look at this sentence first.
To build small circles or start a new Cold War, to reject, threaten or intimidate others, to willfully impose decoupling, supply disruption or sanctions, and to create isolation or estrangement will only push the world into division and even confrontation. We cannot tackle common challenges in a divided world, and confrontation will lead us to a dead end.
Dr. Mahbubani, what do you make of his words there? How much is his vision backed up, or his assessment backed up by reality? What do you think of its relevance?
Well, I must say, I read the speech by President Xi very carefully. It's a very wise, thoughtful, and insightful speech. And I think much of humanity will be very happy if more leaders of the world use exactly the same language and the same concepts as President Xi used in his speech, because the key point he's making in his speech is that COVID-19 is sending us a very important message that all of us are on the same boat. And I want to emphasize that because, people don't understand what that means. And I always say that before the modern era, when 7.3 billion people live in 193 separate countries, it was as though they were living in 193 separate boats. But now the world has shrunk. We have come together. COVID-19 shows we have come together. So all the 7.3 billion people are no longer living in 193 separate boats. They are all living in 193 separate cabins on the same boat. Now, if you're all on the same boat in different cabins, you cannot just take care of your cabin. You have to take care of the boat as a whole. And that's the message that President Xi was conveying with his very wise speech at the World Economic Forum. And it's important for us actually to send a signal that we welcome and support such global initiatives like the one that he's promoted in his speech.
What do you think of China's worry about the small circle mentality? And he specifically pointed out the danger of a new Cold War. What do you think of that?
Well, there is absolutely no doubt that a major geopolitical contest has broken out between the United States and China. And as you know, I wrote a whole book, Has China Won?, which will fortunately be published in China very soon, which explains the structural forces that are driving this US-China geopolitical contest. And it'd be very hard to stop it. But at the same time, you cannot deny the fact that when you have a crisis like COVID-19, it shows that actually whatever the differences between the United States and China, and there are huge differences in some areas, they also have common interests because they have to deal with common global challenges like global warming, like COVID-19. So it's very wise for President Xi to say, hey, don't just focus on our differences, look at our common challenges, and also, frankly, the primary goal of President Joe Biden should be to improve the well-being of the American people. The primary goal of President Xi is to improve the well-being of the Chinese people. There is no contradiction between Joe Biden improving the well-being of the American people and President Xi improving the well-being of the Chinese people. And therefore, in some areas, the US and China can work together and should work together.
Well, some people don't believe that. They believe that if President Xi works on the Chinese people fulfilling their dreams, it must take away from the American people fulfilling their dreams under the leadership of President Joe Biden. What is your reaction to that, Dr. Mahbubani?
I have very good news here. Economics is not a zero-sum game. Security is, okay? When you fight a war, right, one side wins, one side loses. But when you have economic competition between two companies, company A can be very profitable and company B can be very profitable, right? I mean, it's not a zero-sum game. So if the US and China, for example, work together, let's say in sort of liberalizing global trade, right? To overcome the trade war that I think President Trump unwisely launched, and to go back to multilateral cooperation, the World Trade Organization. And you know what happens? If you liberalize global trade, America will win, China will win, and the rest of the world will win. We will all win. It's not a zero-sum game.
Some people do argue, however, that, and you mentioned too, in terms of security, it is a zero-sum game. In a war, for instance, you can have only one side winning. And precisely the argument they propose, they say, is that when China's economy is winning, China's military might is also winning, and therefore in terms of a security game, then China will be on the winning side and the United States will be on the losing side. That's why they must not let China's economic might keep growing. Dr. Mahbubani, what is your reaction?
Well, I must say you have described very well the mindset of many of the key policy makers in Washington, D.C., who see this U.S.-China contest as a zero-sum game. And the only trouble with that is they're using 19th century mental maps when countries were living in distinct universe. But as I say today, U.S. and China are no longer on two separate boats. They're on the same boat. So frankly, if something goes wrong with China or something goes wrong with the United States, the world suffers and everybody suffers. So I think what I think we need to emphasize to Washington, D.C. is, given the current realities of our world, should we put security number one and economics number two? Or should we put economics number one and security number two? And frankly, if the Joe Biden administration sent people to listen to the countries in Asia, the message they would get from almost all countries in Asia is, please, let's get our economic house in order. And that's why, I was very pleased. The very first point that President Xi made in his speech was, let's once again have macroeconomic global coordination, just like we did at the G20 meeting after the global financial crisis. In fact, the most sensible thing the world could do today is once again have a G20 meeting and get the same kind of macroeconomic global coordination. And guess what? Everybody will benefit. And certainly the American people will benefit as much as anybody else.
Well, you mentioned recently in an interview, you said the Biden administration will likely maintain tough rhetoric against China, but it remains to be seen if the administration would listen to other countries in the region, meaning Asia, before solidifying its policies towards Beijing. So is that what you mean, that they really need to listen to the voices of countries here? And how can you reassure the audience here that what you just said is really the shared sentiment of the great majority of nations in this part of the world? That is, they want to see China and the United States working together, at least not confronting each other.
I think if the Biden administration sends its envoys to East Asia, to Southeast Asia, what they will hear is the following message. Number one, we want the United States to remain in the region. We don't want the United States to leave. The United States has played an active, constructive role in this region. Number two, while we want the United States to remain in the region, we also want to have good ties with China, with whom we have very good economic links also. So don't ask any country in Asia to choose between the United States and China. And the third point they will hear is that right now, our countries are suffering from COVID-19, our economies have been devastated, poverty is coming back. So please, let us now press the pause button on the US-China geopolitical contest. Let us work together to take care of the immediate challenges first, and then we can worry about the long-term geopolitical contest later on. So most countries in the world are very clear that they just want to focus on improving the livelihood of their people. And frankly, for countries, let's say like Indonesia, if the governments want to be re-elected again, what do they have to do? Improve the livelihood of their people.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, President Xi also warned against selective multilateralism. It's a relatively new term for many people, I believe. And recently, Chinese State Council and Foreign Minister Wang Yi also brought up the concept of so-called pseudo-multilateralism. It's interesting because US President Joe Biden has talked about a return to multilateralism. Let's hear what President Xi says, and then we'll discuss briefly whether these two concepts are the same and what to do about it.
State-to-state relations should be coordinated and regulated through proper institutions and rules. The strong should not bully the weak. Decisions should not be made by simply showing off strong muscles or waving a big fist. Multilateralism should not be used as pretext for acts of unilateralism. Principles should be preserved, and rules once made should be followed by all. Selective multilateralism should not be our option.
So, Dr. Mahbubani, is that a necessary reminder to the people who might not understand multilateralism in this sense?
Well, you know, I was ambassador to the UN for almost over 10 years. And the word multilateralism is a very boring word. People don't understand what it means. What it means is very simple, is that can you imagine if we were all living in a village? The world has become a global village. And if you have a problem in the village, you get the village council and everybody comes together to speak. The rich people speak, the poor people speak, the middle classes speak, and everybody must have a voice. Multilateralism means very simply that every country must have a voice when a decision is made that affects the whole world. It's as simple as that. And so the fact that Joe Biden is speaking in favor of multilateralism, we should welcome it and say, thank you very much. That's the exact opposite of what President Trump said. And where, President Trump said, make America great again, forget about the world. President Joe Biden is saying, no, we have to work with the world. Let's go back to multilateral institutions. And it's wonderful that the United States has gone back to the World Health Organization after President Joe Biden was elected. That's a very positive sign.
Well, good. We are going to leave it on that very positive sign. And of course, we're going to see what happens, right, under these very important rhetorics, both by the Chinese president and by the US administration. Many thanks to Kishore Mahbubani, Distinguished Fellow from the National University of Singapore.